Fair play to our enemies. It takes an impressive amount of mental gymnastics to somehow phrase putting more of the gas of life, CO2, into the atmosphere as treating this place as an open sewer.
One of your regents in the UC system, Jose Hernandez, was describing to me earlier today his shock when he came around for the first sunrise as an astronaut and saw that thin blue line on the horizon as the rising sun illuminated it. That's what we're using as an open sewer for the gaseous pollution that we're pumping into it every single day at the rate of 162 million tons every 24 hours. And it accumulates so much so that it now traps as much extra heat every day as would be released by 750,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding on the Earth every day. Hard to wrap one's mind around it, but we have to realize what we're doing and then stop what we're doing.
What our enemies do is they invert reality and they use language to make it seem like something that isn't bad is bad or something that is good isn't good. We want more CO2. Once you actually look at the data and go beyond the propaganda, you see that we are actually in a CO2 drought. If CO2 levels went below 150 parts per million, all plant life on Earth would die and would be soon to follow. And then they say that CO2 causes warming. Well, maybe it does, but that seems to taper off massively once we get more CO2 into the atmosphere. And I don't know about you guys, but when I heard global warming coming from the cloud and dark and gloomy UK like a lot of the time, it's like, yes, please give me some of that global warming. And that's just here in the UK. If you actually look all around the world, even Africa, overwhelmingly more people die from cold than heat. So if this place was just a little bit warmer, not only would it be a boon for like nearly all life on Earth, it would actually save lives. Which, who doesn't want more humans around? Well, I guess people like Bill Gates, who seem to think that because farmers are doing what they do best, that this is what we need to stop and reduce and destroy to save our society. Somehow the people growing food out there every day doing the hard yards, putting the food that we enjoy on our plates and tables every single day, they're the problem. We need to destroy them to save our society.
When people think of climate change, they think mostly about electricity, and that's only a quarter of the emissions come from coal, natural gas plants that are generating your electricity. When we make materials like steel and cement, those two alone are about an eighth of the emissions. And so the fact that we're going to build these cities, that the world is urbanizing, means that unless you have a totally zero-emission way of making steel and cement, then you haven't come near to solving the overall climate problem. And so moving away, the term clean energy has handicapped the field because that makes people think, oh, maybe it's just electricity in passenger cars, and they don't see agriculture, industry, buses, trains as part of the problem. Animals that can eat grass have very unusual stomachs that have these bacteria that are methanogenic in there. And so they leak natural gas, both out the front and the back. And so people have said, well, let's change the hay or throw some things in there. And nobody knows how to get rid of
No one knows how to get cows to stop farting.
Exactly, or burping. And so there is artificial meat, but that's at a very early stage. But that's another big source of greenhouse gas emissions. So, I'm just trying to make sure that the people who acknowledge the problem, which I think is fantastic, that they understand the breadth of innovation required before you can get anywhere near to what we have to do, which is zero. If it was a 50% reduction, then you could ignore, okay, leave the cows alone. But because we're trying to avoid the temperature continuing to go up, you do need to go to zero. Otherwise, you're continuing to have temperature increase.
Absolute insanity. We're dealing with a climate cult. We've actually done massive, massive damage to this agenda over the past 3 years since the climate con was formed. We've distributed tens of thousands of leaflets. We've got millions and millions of views on our content. We have 2 books now, and we're making massive waves. I'm very impressed with the community and what we've done to do damage to this agenda, and we're seeing the fruits of our efforts pay off, as now it looks like we're turning the tide on the culture war. We still have a lot of work to do, especially here in the UK. We have far from won this battle, but we're seeing cracks and creaks in the narrative. It seems to have gone past its peak, because for about 5 decades, roughly 4 to 5 decades, this agenda of the climate change doom narrative has been getting more and more powerful, gaining more and more momentum, getting more and more laws passed, influencing our society more and more and more. But I think we've actually reached the peak. We still got quite a long way to go to make sure it keeps going down, and we just look back at this period of our history as like some weird time when we thought that somehow CO2 was this deadly killer gas set to kill us all, when in fact it's plant food. It's literally what plants eat. So I think if we just keep pushing, keep saying our message, keep repeating it, keep learning and growing and developing. That's why I have the Great Climate Con website. There's so much information on there for free that anybody here can, go and read and watch the podcasts I've done with scientists and PhDs and so on, and get up to speed with all of the knowledge that's on the website, and then have the basic understanding of this agenda. Because then once you have the basics down, that's all you actually need. You only need to be above your average normie who's just been programmed to a point through school and media and society. They haven't actually done a deep dive research into this. Most of them. There's a tiny segment that are like the climate cult zealots, the net zero zealots, who have actually looked into this a little bit more than your average person. But most people have just been programmed to a point. They just tacitly agree with what's going on with all of the climate cult nonsense. But if you just have a little bit more knowledge than them, then you could destroy everything. And it's not very difficult. It's more of an art of how you get this information across to people. But the culture war, the information war, is happening every single day. Every single opportunity that you have to raise your voice about these issues is an opportunity for you to take part in this culture information war. For example, you could just be sitting in a sauna, a public sauna, and there's 5 people there, and one person you start chatting to, and there's 3 people listening, and you start talking about the politics, and they don't even say a thing, these other 3 people, but those 2 people take control of the conversation, and then you can right there and then change what everybody in that sauna thinks just a little bit. You might not convince the person you're debating with. Maybe they have opposite views to you, but the other 3 people listening are like, They go home and are like, that guy, well, that woman was like actually speaking some sense. That's interesting. This is how it's won all over the country. And you get saying the same thing again, like conversations happening in pubs, conversations happening in cafes, all these different public spaces, even around the dinner table at your home. This is where we influence the culture war, and I do believe if all of us keep pushing and pushing hard, we will actually defeat the climate con. So if you haven't already, go visit thegreatclimatecon.com. I'm also going to be posting climate con related content on this channel because, thank God, perhaps I now have access to this channel once again, and there's lots of content that you guys would not have seen that's related to all of this, so I think you'll find very useful. I just posted the episode of the Climate Con podcast I had with Dr. Robert Ian Holmes, who is a PhD scientist who got cancelled for questioning the narrative on climate change, and he was teaching that to his students, and they're like, no, we got to cancel this guy, because that's what they do. They censor and quiet anybody who questions this narrative, but then they amplify and give all the funding to the scientists who toe the party line. So it seems like there's a 97% consensus, but that's actually bullshit, which I've broken down as well, that specific myth. It's not true. Most scientists do not agree that man-made climate change is actually happening to any significant level. In fact, the overwhelming consensus is we're not sure, or that maybe it's so small it's not even worthwhile doing anything about. But the data gets cherry-picked and manipulated, and suddenly we have this narrative, this agenda, this propaganda piece that sounds good and scares people. It's all bullshit. I really enjoy actually going into this subject because it brings so much good news to a lot of what we're dealing with. It's one of the few subjects in the awake space that when you actually do a deep dive into it, it doesn't fill you with dread and fear, because it's like, well, there's a lot of darkness you have to look at when you first wake up. And as part of the process, we have to understand what's going on here, and you need to have the spiritual stuff to balance it all out. But with the climate stuff, it's actually really quite empowering and removes a lot of the darkness around your perspectives on humanity in this world and and how we interact here. At least that's what it did for me. And it's like, suddenly you realise we're not some plague on the planet that needs to be obliterated to somehow, we need to like destroy our society to save our society. None of it makes sense. So together we will defeat the climate con.